Impact Teams Radio. Welcome to Impact Teams Radio, the show where we explore what it takes to be a leader of the leaders in corporate America. Get ready to be inspired and discover proven tips for going from average to exceptional. Now, here's your host and guide, Tony Sherman.
Hello and welcome to Impact Teams Radio. I'm your host, Tony Sherman, and this week my guest is Shelley Smith. Hello, Shelley, and welcome.
Hello, Tony. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm just outside Boston today, and it's pouring with rain in the middle of June, but nevertheless, today is still a good day. You may hear in the background the traffic whooshing by on wet road surfaces, but we'll try to minimize that.
Fabulous. We actually had all that rain yesterday down here in Virginia, so I know what you're going through.
So let me say thank you very much, Shelley. You can have it back anytime you want. So, Shelley, before we get into the meat and potatoes of the interview, let me step back from the mic for a minute or two and give you a short time to just introduce yourself to our listeners. Tell them about who you are, where you've come from, and what your specialty is.
Well, very good. Thank you so much for having me on today. Again, my name is Shelley Smith. I'm the owner and founder of Premier Rapport. At the very core of my business is all about the connection, and I'm sure we'll get into that later. I even have a book coming out called The Connection. But my consulting firm serves businesses of all sizes, from the sole proprietor to large businesses, with a focus on overall leadership, executive coaching, organizational development, behavioral assessments with predictive index, corporate wellness, and much more, retreat, and all sorts of fun things. I actually got my tutelage, if you will, in life from a family-owned business in Indiana, which is where I grew up. My parents owned an auction house and a restaurant, and at the ripe old age of 12, I was introduced to what it is to work and to get up early morning and to do the right thing. And from there, I was able to go into corporate structure with Marriott International back in the early 80s when the Courtyard division was just starting. I spent 14 wonderful years with Marriott and got an incredible foundation of structure and knowledge and business acumen that I was able to take into the franchise world of the hospitality industry, and worked for a couple of local companies here in Virginia. One of them started with 8, and over an 8-year period, I grew them to 32, predominantly Marriott and Hilton franchises and Starwood. And that was fabulous working with them as an executive and COO. And then another similar one that had 2 and grew with 8. And it was at that point where I thought it was about the brick and mortar and went into the partnership and the brick and mortar of the building. And I woke up one day and said, it's not about the building, it's about the people. And through a conversation with the franchise broker, I actually had purchased a franchise called the Alternative Board, which is a business consulting peer board. About a year into it, I switched and actually got out of that franchise and have continued my business as is today, Premier Rapport. And again, I learned along the way that it was about the people. It was about all the phone calls that I get from ex-employees and associates and colleagues, and just being able to raise others' games as an individual. And that brings me to where I am today. And I reside in Virginia. I happily married 21 years, and I've got 3 wonderful children, and active member of my church, and active in the community Women's Peninsula Network group, and there we are.
Well, that's a full journey, which we're just about to delve into. But I see that your niche, if you will, is encouraging and coaching leaders at the executive level. Would that be correct?
Yes, it is.
And how did you focus in on that niche? What made you say, okay, that's where my skill set adds the most value to people?
Well, it's actually through the continued connections that I had in my life in the hotel industry, and the desk clerks and the servers and that were promoted to general managers, and then general managers to area managers and districts, and owning buildings and branching out on their own for their own franchises. It was those relationships and the continued conversations that I had with people just calling me for advice, including people that I had to politely release to the industry, back into the industry, would call me for leadership and how do you do this and motivational, and I've got this, this is what's going on with succession planning, and this is what's going on in our HR department, and I need your help and your guidance. And it was because of that it just, to say that I'm jazzed by it and passionate about it is kind of an understatement. I'm just all about connecting people to the right resources in the right manner, and helping them lift their game, whatever, direction or accomplishment, whether it's an individual or whether it's a department or an entire company. So it's just one thing has led to another, and it's through those relationships with the colleagues. I even had a phone call yesterday with somebody I worked with 10 years ago asking me for advice. So hopefully that answers your question. It's just...
Oh, absolutely. What I want to do is I want to take that passion and say, we always like to start the show with focusing on the wins, because everyone likes a winner, and ask you to look back over the arc of your career and pick a couple of stories where you have applied your skills and your knowledge into a situation and it's come out well and you're really pleased with it. Tell us a bit about the situation and tell us why you were pleased.
Well, that's a really great question. The best win is actually one that was a general manager that I had to release. And I'd worked with her for a couple of years. I was still fairly new into the franchise company. And she was at a Hampton Inn that we had. And it was about 3 years old, and we had gone through a renovation. And to make a long story short, she wasn't able to really engage the associates and motivate the team long term. She had continual turnover that was happening, and was very delusional, if you will, with how she managed. And there was lots of tough conversations that we had, and I do believe that as leaders as a whole, more honest conversations need to have. People are so afraid of confrontation, and they don't realize that confrontation actually builds trust and brings on the integrity and the building of the relationship, and that's when people are allowed to help one another. So through a series of disciplinary actions with her and action planning, ultimately I had to let her go. She actually called me it was probably 60 to maybe 90 days later and asked to have a cup of coffee with me. And I was taken back and surprised because I thought that she was still probably very angry at me. And I said, sure, no problem. So I met her at the local Starbucks, and she went into this entire story about what had happened and how she had gotten where she had gotten. And the bottom line was that she came back and was very appreciative at the attempts that I'd made to help her change in her behaviors. And that's actually what led me down to behavioral assessments and predictive index ultimately, was understanding the true motivational drives of people and that everybody doesn't fit into one box and one motivation. And yes, even the top executives need to be motivated and are not necessarily self-motivated. And the golden rule about treat others like you want to be treated actually isn't true. It's actually you need to treat others like they need to be treated. You've got to find their motivational needs, wants, and desires. So for this particular person, it was eye-opening. I was very thankful that she was thankful to me. But it was a life-changing event for me and how I manage and how I look and how I listen, and that everybody doesn't do and can't do, and it's okay as long as you get to the same results in the same timeline. So it was about the motivation and the listening. So it was actually a huge lesson learned, as well as a really positive outcome. She's actually a very successful area manager for another local franchise company, and it was the right fit and the right culture for her, and they're able to meet her motivational needs. So it's good, and I still keep up with her, and this was years ago.
Actually, that's amazing. So what you're talking about, in blunt terms, in corporate terms, is I'm going to fire someone.
Yes, sir.
And what happens is what everyone would assess in the moment as a bad situation, both of you had major wins. But what I'm interested in is the fact that not only did you both win, but you were both mature enough to reflect on the lessons learned that came out of that, at different paces and different styles.
Yeah.
But people forget that a lot of times that just because something bad happens doesn't mean there aren't good lessons sitting underneath it.
Oh, I think, and I don't know if it was Albert Einstein or whom it was, but that said that experience comes through life lessons learned. So we truly don't learn. We can watch and listen, but until we experience it ourselves, I personally don't think we actually learn it. And I don't know who said this either. Teach what you need to learn most, I think is absolutely true as well. And you have to have the ability to stop, look, reflect, and move on and pivot, as you need to in life. I think it's immensely critical as an individual and certainly as a leader.
Right. And the funny thing is, when you were doing that, I was taking down notes like crazy, like I normally do. And one of the things that you sparked off in my mind, one of the 1 Minute Manager books, and I forget which one, but Ken Blanchard has this phrase, which you basically say, treat others as you would be treated is not a good process. His thing was different strokes for different folks.
Exactly.
and immediately sparked to mind, because it's true, isn't it? If you treat everybody, I've got 3 boys. The last one's just leaving home, and the one thing I was very keen on all the way through their upbringing was not to treat them equally.
Yeah.
Fairly, but not equally.
Yeah.
Because they're different young men, and they're very different men now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've got a 25-year-old. I've got a young man who's going off to Afghanistan in a couple of weeks.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. And I've got one who's just leaving the house. He's my boomerang boy. This is his second time leaving the house.
Wow. Well, I couldn't agree with you more as it comes to children. My 3 are vastly different, too. Boy, girl, boy, and wow. Hardwiring is so completely different. I actually have had them take, of course, the things I have at my fingertips with the tools and trying to give myself some more insight on how to motivate them and communicate them through their teenage years. So it's fun.
Oh, that's smart. So, in fact, you did touch on this earlier on, and I'm a bit nervous about time. So let's not worry too much about going into some of the lessons learned through failure. We may get there. But I want to make sure we have enough time to cover this predictive index that you've been really closely involved in it, and you mentioned it through the story we just shared. Tell us a little bit more about the predictive index that you're involved with. How do you get involved, and what's the value of it to our listeners? How they can reach out, learn more about this, and potentially use it in their workplaces?
Sure. Well, first of all, I got involved in it when I was with one of the franchise companies. The senior VP of HR that I had hired actually brought it in, and at that point, she was doing it manually. And I had her do it with the 17 that were direct reports to me. And so she went through the assessment and a little bit on it on sort of a high level. And honestly, at that time, I didn't get the whole big picture of it. So fast forward a little bit, I was actually working with a fellow colleague, and I had started this business and had went through and gotten re-synced, if you will, with someone on LinkedIn. Said, hey, you need to meet Steve Picardi Jr. He does this predictive index thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know Steve Picardi. We're already on LinkedIn. And to make a long story short, Steve Picardi Jr. and his father, Steve Picardi, are the owners of Predictive Index PI Mid-Atlantic out of Annapolis, Maryland. And I went through a couple of their workshops and was completely, utterly blown away. This was 3 years ago. So I was a user of it for a couple of years through my HR department, but I did not realize at the time the amazing benefit and impact that it could have on an industry, regardless of what the trade was. So I brought this in as my tool belt under the executive coaching piece and, of course, the leadership and development, and that's what I want to make a point of. The behavioral assessment, and it is an assessment, it's not a test, because a test you can pass or fail. This assessment is about the behavior and how we are truly hardwired in life. And it doesn't change over time. I've given it to many people. It's been around since 1955. It's a 4-factor measurement at this point, and it measures our dominance, our need for the me or the I, which side of the fence we live on, for the we and the team and the harmony. It measures our extroversion, meaning our need to be liked, people, connection first, or things. And then it measures our sense of urgency. Are we methodical and calm, consistent, process-driven, or do we have the sense of urgency and need the variety and sometimes the lack of patience? And then finally, it measures our need for formality, the need for the book and the rules, or more so the freedom. So through the understanding of our behaviors, of whether we're proactive, reactive, risk taker, risk mitigator, quick to connect, take time to connect, just as a few examples, we then know how we are internally motivated. And the ability to understand ourselves is one thing, to recognize that, but it's more so about our ability as leaders and mentors to set ourselves aside to be able to have that understanding and clarity of those that we work with one-on-one in any sort of a team collaborative environment. And I have found this tool to just not be brought into a company for hiring selection, which honestly, that's usually where people start with it, but it goes through the entire life cycle of a team. So once you've done the hiring and selection, it helps you with the onboarding piece. It helps you with the ongoing talent development management piece, the change that goes on within companies, and then, of course, the structure and the continual organizational development and the succession planning. So it's a phenomenal leadership development tool, and I just dearly love it. I use it with all levels of clients, whether I enter into a client with just a predictive index tool, or if I'm coming in to coach and counsel and do something completely different, I always ask that they take the assessment, and I share my behaviors as well as theirs, because it just completely diffuses and raises the level of respect and understanding that you have from one another from a communication style, preference, and of course the leadership, decision-making, and much more.
Have you had clients coaching people who've then implemented it in their corporations?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And there's thousands of even Fortune 500 companies. Every year when the top on Fortune magazine and Forbes, when it comes out with top companies, we always have companies listed in there. Yes, it's absolutely what they do. When they take it and they see it, it bleeds through the entire company. They usually start with areas that have the biggest opportunities, whichever department that is, and they start with the assessments internally. And, of course, all the candidates is, ideally, the holistic approach from an employee engagement and a succession planning piece and the use of this tool, because it is still a tool, is that it helps you to get at things better, quicker, faster. It helps with the fit gap from an interview process and speed, as well as an introduction of a team, whether you're doing an internal hire or whether you're doing an external hire. Does that make sense?
It does. But what I'm thinking about, so if we have listeners who are leading teams and they're moving forward, would this have value for teams that are on the go, that are already built up? Is this a tool that they should consider reaching out and using?
Oh, absolutely. It helps with lifting the game. Even when teams are already effective, this just continually helps with that effectiveness internally as well as the others as they work with within their company, their trade. I mean, obviously you wouldn't have it from your outside clients, but the inner workings, yes, absolutely. Let me just say that I haven't met a company yet of any trade size and or type that doesn't have communication opportunities, as I would say. So that alone, it just becomes, like I said, a game changer. An example, I've got a couple of CEOs that have recently brought it in, and fairly large public companies. And the CEO, in conversation with his executive team, I was giving an example and said, when you guys prepare a meeting and agenda for your staff meetings, make sure that a few days prior you're checking with the CEO, gathering the list of topics, and giving him all of the resources and the information and the data prior if you're wanting him to make a decision. Because he's not going to make a decision because he's a creative, he's analytical, he's a thinker, he needs to take time to digest it. You cannot walk into his office and expect him to give you a decision. He's going to take time even if you hand him all of the facts. And he looked at me and he looked at his team and he goes, well, gosh, doesn't everybody do it that way? And I was like, no. So yes. And that firm's actually been around for 25 years and they're very successful. So it's always interesting and funny to hear people not realize that everyone doesn't live within your own realm.
So it's actually not just about moving from dysfunction to function. It's about moving from good to better.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. As Colin says, moving from good to great. I think there's always opportunities to lift one's game. Absolutely always opportunities to do so. So yes. And the listeners out there, you can go on and actually take an assessment and try it out. It's very quick, easy, and friendly, and you'll love it. You can do that on my website, and you can do that on our PI Mid-Atlantic website and also our worldwide website. So feel free to do that. Jump in.
And what we'll do here, Shelley, is we'll make sure that we put some links on the show notes so you and I can get together afterwards and make sure that the links are correct and people can jump on the website and jump straight from this show straight into the assessments if they're interested.
Fabulous.
So we've pretty much run out of time, but I do want to ask you one more question. We've got time to squeeze one in.
Sure.
As you look at your arc from being somebody who starts in the workforce to becoming a proven leader in the workforce to be someone who helps other leaders raise their game, how did you become a leadership coach? Who was your mentor? Who helped train you in becoming a better leader? Did you have a mentor? Did you just learn from books? Did you learn from the environment? What was your path?
I definitely would describe myself as a sponge and didn't realize that until much later in my life. Definitely the first mentors were my parents. I could give you quote after quote, lesson after lesson from my mom and my father that I just didn't realize at the time, but certainly know now, that they were a huge influence, not just personally, but definitely on the business acumen side. I've had lots of mentors. I really, other than my parents, don't have, one person in particular. The sponge comment that I made is that I definitely am a book reader. Love, love, love every leadership book known to man. I'm all about getting it, straight off of the press and hot topic, especially when people are talking about them. The bosses that I've had over the years, people that I've direct reported to, I've tried to, over the years, take the really great things about them. And then when the opportunity was for me to be in charge, so to speak, I always had mental notes of things that I did want to do and things that I didn't want to do. And I think that has become my survival and my mentality of my approach to life is the glass really isn't just half full, it's 3/4 full, and let's just make a good situation out of this. So I've had lots of mentors, and sorry, nobody in particular, just a lot of influencers in my life.
But again, that goes to something, it's easy to be surrounded by good people and good books, and even read good books. But I mean, like you just mentioned, Colin's Good to Great. Mm-hmm. But unless you sit back and reflect and think, how can I use this? As you did in that story you told us at the beginning of the show, where something had happened, the person came back and told you, hey, thank you. And you were like, okay, there's a lesson to be learned here.
Yeah.
And then reflect on what you're learning. I'm sure everybody listening to this has opportunities to learn from the environment they're in if they were to just sit back and be a little bit more reflective.
Yes. One of the things that I always ask for people to do is at the end of the day, stop and take note of what went well today and what didn't and why didn't it. And don't get bogged down in it, but you definitely have to stop and reflect as to why didn't I get XYZ accomplished? Why didn't I get XYZ deal? Why didn't I get the promotion? Why didn't get, because there is always something that we could go back and say, okay, the next time this opportunity presents itself, I can do this. So yes.
Yeah, in fact, one of my habits is at the end of the day to say, what 5 things did I do well that I'm pleased with? And what 1 or 2 things could I have done better at? And I just ask myself those questions. I used to be very self-critical and ask for 5 things I did wrong. I just found that crushed me. So now I just ask for 1 or 2 and try and work on those over the week. And I tend to do enough wrong that I've got plenty to work on.
Very good, very good. I like that.
So, Shelley, when I first reached out to you, I wanted to talk to you about employee engagement, and we haven't even touched that subject. So we've run out of time. Would you mind if I invited you back for another episode where we could have a look at employee engagement?
I would be very honored. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much. So, Impact Team people, if you're listening to this, we've had a lot of great input here. Shelley's going to give us some links in the show notes where we can go and have a look at predictive index for ourselves, see what we can learn for ourselves, and if it's a tool that we can put into our workplaces. So have a look at the show notes this week. Leave us a comment and tune in a couple of weeks' time, and I'll invite Shelley back and we'll have a look at employee engagement. Until then, this is Tony Sherman from Impact Teams Radio. Thank you very much, Shelley, for joining us.
You're welcome.
Okay, have a great week. Bye for now.
That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. Now go and apply these few gems. Make the wisdom you have heard your own. If you want to be part of our launch success, then please go to impactteamsradio.com/love and tell the world. If you want more and never want to miss a beat, please go to impactteamsradio.com/subscribe. If you have 3 minutes, we would love to see a positive review on iTunes. And until next time, remember to act on what you've learned, and you'll be ahead of most of the world. Impact Teams Radio.